Hi, my name's Keith Cooper, Northlight Images, and in this video I'm going to be looking at fisheye lenses. In particular, I'm going to be looking at fisheye lenses, or this one here, on the GFX100S. This is medium format camera, 102 megapixel. I say medium format, it's a small medium format, digital medium format, so it's a 44mm by 33mm sensor, as opposed to the 36mm by 24mm sensor of 35mm, normal full frame cameras like this, my old 5DS here. So I'm going to be looking at using this with an adapter, but I'm going to be looking in general at fisheye lenses, what they do, various ways you can process the lenses. Because the key thing about fisheye lenses is people tend to buy them, they use them a bit, they grow tired of the fisheye look, and then they sit around in a box, and after a while they think, why have I got this lens that I never use? So they get sold secondhand. So first up, if you're looking for fisheye lenses, always check out used secondhand options for them, because you can find stuff really at quite a discount, because people just get lenses like this. It also means that the companies, because not that necessarily that many people want to buy lenses, the second-hand prices don't go up. If a second-hand lens store has got 6 or 7 examples of a lens, they're not going to get a premium price for it. So if you're interested in fisheye, then by all means do check the second hand. Now, I've got lots of articles that I've looked at fisheye lenses and ways of processing the images, and I'll put links to all of those in the notes at with the video. So if you want to follow up more of this, in particular some of the software I'm using. Now, some of it is oldish software, so it may not necessarily be the latest versions of it, but it works. It's one reason I keep some old stuff on my Macs, because I've got software that does specific things very well and it works. And if it works and it gets used for my commercial work, which I do use these lenses for my commercial work, then it's useful. So the lens itself, the one I'm looking at is the Canon EF8-15mm F4L USM zoom fisheye. One thing to remember about focal lengths on fisheye lenses like this is that the focal length does not necessarily relate to how the image looks in the same way that it does for a normal rectilinear lens. Rectilinear just means straight line, keep straight lines straight. Fisheye lenses, as most people think, curve things, but that curvature is a very specific image projection. It's not a lens distortion. It is a deliberate choice of the lens design of how to project the image, and it has some quite useful properties, which means that with fisheye lenses it's possible to do various tricks with them. Now, if you were shooting on film with a fisheye lens, you got what the fisheye lens produced. If you are shooting on digital, then you have far more ability to change the image and do things. You can apply mathematical projections to it. Now, fortunately, most of these are just simple clicks or sliders and adjustments you can make. Processing the images, by the way, and doing it, is not just a straight defishing, as it's called sometimes. In other words, converting the fisheye view to what you would get with a normal lens. There are far more complexities than that. I'll show some examples, and I've got examples of photos that I've produced commercially, where I've produced images that, for clients, and where it's been useful. So I'll show you a few of those, go through some examples of using it here on this, and then I'll finish with some more examples and potential uses of fisheye lenses. You may know them, you may never have seen them. Hopefully by the end of this, you'll think, if you've not used one, whoa, fisheye lens does potentially an awful lot more than I thought it would. So, on this one here, this is the 8-15. Now, it replaced the Canon 15mm f2.8 fisheye lens. If you get one of those, they're both EF mount, so they'll go with an adapter. This one has got a photodiox adapter onto G mount. They will go to an adapter. If you use this particular one here, has an interesting two-part lens cap. That bit comes off there, and you see I've got a petalled lens cap. If I want to use the full field of view, I need to take that off. So there is no lens cap. This lens is designed to project an image onto your film, onto your sensor, with a 180-degree field of view. All changing the focal length does, it doesn't change the shape of the image, it just changes the size of the image. So at 8mm, and this is on a 35mm sensor, I get a circular image and it is 180 degrees field of view. So it's a circular image, which means if I hold a lens like this, I would get a picture, my feet would intrude. So if you're putting it on a tripod, careful you don't catch your tripod legs in it. It happens, and just next to a bit of Photoshop work. Now, as I zoom this lens, as I go from 8 to 15, all that happens is that the projected image gets bigger. So it moves to a partial circular view, to a circular view with a few corners missing, to fully filling a 35mm field of view. Now, you're going to say that's on a 36 by 24 sensor. This is 44 by 33, so it's going to look a bit different. And it does make some differences, but with care, this lens is eminently usable on the GFX camera here. Would go same if I was to put it on a GFX50 or any other camera with that size sensor. So that's it. If you get the old EF15 2.8, it's an excellent lens. It's still one of the most resistant to flare lenses I've used, and you could comfortably include the sun in the shot and you will get no flare out of it. It's a great lens, but it's stuck at 15mm, which gives the 15mm view here, so it fills the whole frame. Now, in filling the whole frame, there is a 180-degree field of view diagonally across the image. Now, it's important to notice diagonals in this, and I'll come back to this when I show some of the images later. It's important things about fisheyes that people don't always realise. But if you get a 15mm, then you're going to have to get some means of removing the lens hood, the petals of it. It's not detachable, it's a fixed one on that. So you may need to get it professionally modified or something like that if you want to use it on a larger sensor, because otherwise the petals will intrude on a larger sensor like this. So there is the lens. I say it's on an adapter here, so the actual lens is slightly smaller. EF mount, the electronics taken care of on this adapter. So there we go, and that goes onto the G mount for that. So there's the lens we're talking about. I'll show some shots that I've taken in the past as well, some examples, as well as specific tests that I've done using this camera here. This view here, well, this is this print at the back here. This was taken on a 21 megapixel Canon 1DS Mark III when I got the lens, and it's Wells Cathedral. It shows the scissor arches in Wells Cathedral, structural elements here which they had to sort of change things on the fly, as they did generally when sort of building cathedrals, to stop the tower from falling down. So, you know, it is a very solid structure here. It's a fascinating structure to look at, and with this particular image here, this is taken with the fisheye, and I've processed this image. Now I'll come back to some of the processing elements in a bit, but that's the done there. Now the next one, this was taken, if I remember rightly, with the original 15mm. There are quite a few different fisheye lenses available. I say if you want more information, I'll put the links to some of my reviews and tests of these. But this particular one here, this is the corner of a building at night. This was done for a new restaurant, and the bit on either side of the building here, it's on a 90-degree corner. So the field of view is giving us looking down both sides of the building. I'm far enough back and I see the inside. You'll notice though that whilst we have curved horizontal lines, all the verticals are straight. And this is one of the bits of software I'll show, FishEye Hemi, that I've used quite a bit over the years, which, although it was developed for being able to shoot groups of people with a fisheye lens, because normally if you use a fisheye lens and put people in it, you get all kinds of distortions, and it does not make for flattering pictures. But if you use this, if you imagine, normally you would have curved horizontal lines, you would have curved vertical lines. This one stretches things out so the verticals go vertical. Now, you need to make sure that the camera is properly level, because otherwise your verticals, you'll get convergence and you'll have to do, you know, fixing of that. But that particular shot was taken a few years ago looking in a rooftop restaurant and a bar. And the interesting bit is the fact that you can see both walls of it, and it's a 90 degree. It's not a narrow bit of building share. The place used this picture for years as an example of it. So that's a processed fisheye lens image. Now, the circular image. People go, well, what uses a circular image? It can make some impressive looking prints. Now, the circular image is actually dead easy to do on the GFX here. And all right, I need to crop to square. And you think, well, who's interested in circular images? I had this is a tree somewhere in Leicester and in a square somewhere. And this particular picture I had at an exhibition, and people loved it. It was printed at 44 inches square. So it makes for a big print, bigger than any of the ones on the wall here. Converted to black and white. It's looking up. Slight movements of the camera will change the composition quite noticeably when it's this wide. Distance, everything like that. But that's a picture that was actually shot specifically for an exhibition. Say it made a 44-inch square picture, and people really liked it, just liked the look of the tree. Now, here's another one I took. This is a sculpture of a seed at the Eden project in Cornwall. This is looking down on it, and the interesting bit here is that if you search the seed at the Eden project on Google for images and look for pictures, you will find that any views that you see taken from this viewpoint, that this circular area is distorted. And the interesting thing about fisheyes is that circles retain their shape. There are all kinds of weirdness you get with the projections. Things will change, but have a look at images when you do them like this. You can get a completely different look, and it's always interesting to see if people even notice it's taken with a fisheye lens. I certainly know that the one at the bar, the rooftop bar, nobody thought that it was done with a fisheye. Why didn't that? Because the straight lines in it. Well, in this one, we've got the circles and the look of it. Just interesting picture of that one. Right, now back to this one. I've got some more examples I'll show in a bit of ones that I've used commercially for this. Here is a photograph. This is taken at 15mm. This is on the GFX. Unfortunately, you can see that basically the focal length doesn't go large enough to fully for the corners to reach there. That means you're going to have to crop, you're going to have to do something to the image. This lens does not zoom out far enough or zoom to a long enough focal length to make the image big enough to cover the full sensor. Now, it's a 4:3 aspect ratio rather than the 3:2 aspect ratio that you get with the 35mm sensor, so things are going to look a bit different anyway. But we've got the typical fisheye look with all curved lines everywhere, and just for once I've included myself in the reflection here, so you can see where the camera is, where I'm looking over off there, the windows, and see the reflections. Now, around the edge you'll see it's black. Now on this particular lens is better than the old one in that there's very little light comes in this out of beyond the image circle area. So it's quite easy to deal with. There's no problems with that. The image quality does fall off greatly towards the absolute edge, but it's fixable. It's quite well behaved. But I've got lots of examples. If you look on the review that I wrote of this particular lens when it came out, looking at details of the image, it does have, and there's a circular view, you can see the 4:3 frame there. Now, it does have a bit of chromatic aberration, not much. It has a bit of flare in it, not much either there. So in general, you're fairly safe with light sources in the source. But here we have, this is the circular image, and this is at 11mm. So 11mm focal length. I've got an image which almost fills the frame. Now, given this is 100 megapixels, we've got, what's the size in here? This must be 50-60 megapixel circular image. When you think that I made that print of the tree from a 21 megapixel Canon 1DS Mark III, then we've got no shortage of resolution here. And in fact, if I look at the image, this was a note on the bin behind the table, free fabric. It's quite, there's no problems with resolution. It's a good sharp lens. Now, would the £3,000 Mamiya 645 fisheye lens that you might be able to find used somewhere, would that do better than this? Well, it would fill the frame, certainly, but would it quality-wise? I don't know. It's a film lens, and I've discovered that film lenses are quite variable in their quality as to how good they are. This lens, if it does what you want, is a good enough quality lens. So there's a view of that. Now, this is all the chromatic aberration you get. That's easily fixed. That's a version of it after I've fixed it. And then I get rid of some purple fringing. These images are only processed in Camera Raw, so I'm using with Photoshop here, but that's easy enough to do. And I've got an image with effectively no colour fringing, virtually no aberrations of any sort. You can see that the image drops off right towards the edge. This is right at the edge of the image circle, and there is a slight bluish tinge comes in. That's from the filtering on the lens, and it's also part of how the lens is designed so that it's not intrusive at the edges, so it doesn't cause problems. It's adjustable if you need to. Now, here's another direct example showing the difference between 35mm crop and the full frame. All I've done is used the built-in 35mm crop option here on this lens, for this lens on this camera. I've got it set so one of the buttons I can just switch between 35mm crop mode and full mode. We can see that it's the same. I haven't moved the camera, I've just changed the cropping. So that's how much you lose. This is about 60 odd megapixels. So even this image here is better than the one I'm getting from the 5DS here. Certainly once it comes to processing the image and stuff. So if need be, if I can't change the geometry the way I want, I could always take the shots with crop mode. Now, I'm going to prefer to take it like this in the full mode and then adjust it afterwards if possible, but sometimes I might want to use the 35. I have, in using adapted lenses, sometimes used crop mode just because the particular lens I wanted that focal length, I wanted that particular field of view. But in general, I will try and use as much of the centre of this as I can. I'm not interested in the other crop modes that are available. This has got all kinds of crop modes in them. They are somewhere in the menu system here. I'm not interested in using them. That's the limit of what I want to use with it. Now, that's the two images. This is the image opened up in Camera Raw. And here we've got, it's processed. This is the 35mm lens. You can see it's 4:3 aspect ratio. And yeah, I've just told it to fix a chromatic aberration. But I can use the lens profile in Camera Raw for this particular lens. This is the crop mode. I can use the Canon lens profile, even though I'm not using it on a Canon camera, and it straightens it out. Now, thing to note about using these correction profiles is the correction profiles try to take it from a lens, everything curved to an everything straight point of view. So it converts it to how it would look with a very wide angle lens, a straightforward rectilinear lens. Well, that's okay. We can see how much we're losing a fair bit there, but things are straightened out. It looks quite good. There's no shortage of detail. It's softening a little bit in the corners. I think I took this at f8, which the lens performs well at, and it's not enough to start, softening things for this. Experiment with it with the different settings. It looks great even at f4. The vignetting, overall vignetting is a bit more noticeable, and the image quality drops off towards the edges a bit more. But that's the two there. That's with the 35mm crop. Now, what about if I take the full lens? Let's go down there. That is using the full shot. You see we've gone to 4:3 ratio. And we've not got any problems at the corners. This is using the correction. So what I've got is I've applied the straightening out, but it's still curved. Why is that? That's because I've got a strength adjustment here. For the 35mm sensor, I keep the strength at 100%, and that turns into a rectilinear look. For this, because of the larger sensor, I need to crank that up. And if I remember rightly, it goes up to 170, nearly 180%. So I'm overdoing the correction. And you can see now we've got the really wide view here. So this is the 4:3 frame. So this is using most of the sensor here. It straightened it out massively. You're getting all kinds of very strong edge effects here. It's distinctly softer in the corners here at this point. And also you notice we've got things leaning a bit like that. Now that's purely because I took this handheld and didn't level the camera up properly. Lenses like this, the really wide angle, really do show whether you've got your camera leveled properly. And I hadn't in this instance, but that's fixable. There we go. Simple adjustment. I've now got, not quite right, but near enough, give you the idea. I've now got a super wide view. Well, the thing is, most of the time, I don't want this super duper wide view. I mean, I've got wide lenses anyway, and I've got wide shift lenses and things I can use. So if I really want this stretched out in the corners look, I can do that anyway. Quite often I don't really want that sort of view. I want something I can get from processing the images. Now, if I go to this shot here, now I'm going to use some software here called FishEye Hemi. The original version of this came as 3 Photoshop plugins for different settings. There were no settings or anything. You just picked whichever one matched your picture, try it and see what it looks like. If it worked, it worked. If it didn't, well, try the different one. I've also got FishEye Hemi 2, which gives you all kinds of adjustments and things. So I was curious to see how it would handle this image here. And this is the image taken at 15mm. And so we've got corners we're missing, and it's quite strong effect there. Oh, one thing I should add about fisheye lenses is that straight lines that go through the center of the field of view remain straight. So if you have the horizon halfway up your picture, so your camera's level, the horizon will remain a straight line. Similarly, if you've got, say, a lamppost in the middle, absolute middle of the shot, it will remain vertical, it will remain a straight line. The curvature only happens to lines which do not run through the center of the image here. That's something you can make use of when you know it, and it allows you to play around with the geometry of the views you're going to get. Now, I'll show some more examples of this in a bit, but it's important to remember that straight lines on a fisheye lens stay straight if they go through the center of the frame. So there's that. Now, this is how much you crop. Now, I can use the automatic crop in this, and that'll crop the image to 36mm by 24mm, or I can just set a 3:2 aspect ratio crop and crop afterwards so that I'm just losing slight bits of the corners here. Now that gives me more image to play with. It may not defish or be processed quite as well, but it's worth trying if you don't want the whole image. Now with FishEye Hemi, I've done it here, and here, there's a shot. with it. Now I've set it at full frame. You can see we've got some verticals that are relatively vertical, horizontal line across. This path wanders all over the place. It's a straight line originally. So we can see that different bits of curvature, but verticals, so we've got horizontal lines, such as the top of the building, have stayed curved, but horizontal lines, vertical lines, are now properly vertical. So that one works quite well with that. So that's from that. Now, if I look at the next one, there's the image there. I've zoomed it in a bit more, made the crop a little bit smaller, and it's just given a slightly better view. Now, whether an image like this works is something you will have to decide as to what works, but that is very different from the classic fisheye look where everything's curved. It's almost like I'll keep the curvature on the horizontal lines and other, but verticals, I'll have those straight. And given that when we look at pictures, it's verticals being off true that we notice the most, hence why you use shift lenses to stop buildings falling over. So if you need to point your camera upwards, you get converging verticals. But if you've got a shift lens, you keep your camera lower and shift the lens upwards, and you get those straight verticals, as you do in this. Now, you could crop, you don't have to keep all this distorted stuff down the bottom. You could crop that off and you've got a nice wide view. It's up to you to come up with ideas how to do it. Now, some shots inside, some stitching. If you take the circular image, you can stitch circular images. Now, this is using software called AutoPanoGiga. Unfortunately, I think it was DJI bought out the company a few years ago, and they promptly killed off this product. Now, fortunately, I've still got a version of it. You can still find it around places, but it's the software I used for creating the big 47-foot long panoramic print I did a few years ago. I keep a copy of it. I keep a backup of it that is never touched, just in case, because I know how the software works. Never underestimate familiarity with software. Now, I do look at new software every so often, but if I've got something that works really well. Now, this particular one is 3 circular images stitched together. This is just the outline during the process of putting it. So I've got one view looking that way and one at 90 degrees to it. So I've got 3 shots here. I could take 4 shots and get a full 360 degree, 5 shots if I took the ceiling as well. And if I really want to mess around with things, I can do a shot of the ground as well. But that's for spherical VR type stuff. But anyway, there we go. We've got that. I've put the images together in this, and I've got it to do a stitching of it. This is where, if you're going to be doing working on these images, you can have a few issues, because what happens is that the EXIF data may be being used by the software to work out its stitching parameters. That's fine as long as the software knows what the real focal length is and the software knows what the sensor size is. This one defaults to a 35mm sensor, so I had to go in, because obviously this software, this camera did not exist when this software was produced, so I had to manually alter things. But that'll depend on the software you're using. If you're using newer software, you may well find that it supports this size sensor, whether it's the 50 megapixel, 100 megapixel version. So that's okay for that. So there we go. We've got that. This is just a preview of it, of a particular projection. There's a different projection, and I've just cropped a section out of the middle of the image there. And that is the image after I've stitched it. Now, looking at this, I can see a few bits of residual curvature in vertical lines. This is a cylindrical projection, so it should be straight. That has come from this particular image. I went back and changed things. That's come because the software was trying to do things automatically, and it didn't know this size sensor, so I hadn't set the focal length correctly. It was measuring the focal length reported as the 35mm equivalent focal length, and whatever was happening, it just caused it to not quite stitch properly. But that's one of those things that you sort out when you do it. Once you've got it, you can just stitch things and you can produce images like this, no trouble at all. Images like this, generally, composition of them. It's very tricky to make compositions which work for this without looking really weird. But if you want really weird, that's one way of doing it. And it can be quite useful in showing a space. It gives an unusual impression of the size of a space. Now, how big's that image? Well, it's quite a hefty image. The size, if I was to print it at 300 pixels per inch, it would print at 58 inches by 26 inches, so quite a big print. That's one of the reasons why I want this particular camera, because it gives me more data to play around with. In general, I have never found a good reason why I would want to use less megapixels than more megapixels. I'm sure there are some, but not for the sorts of work I do. Now, I said I'd mention a few more examples of using fisheye. Here's a circular image. This is in the chapter house at Wells Cathedral. This was another one that was used for an exhibition of a series of square circular prints, and I found interesting reaction with them on the wall. They're big enough people can walk right up to them, see them from a distance. And it's great watching people looking at images like this, as how they move the head, as they make sense of the image. Now, this version here is perhaps a bit more obvious what it is. Here we've got the curvature, and we can see the central post. If I just go back to the other one, you can see a much stronger geometric look to that one there. That one, if you know the place, you'll work it out. But that one, if you see that one first, you'll know the other picture. And as you see, looking up there, keeping that in the middle, we have the circle fitting around the shape of the chapter house like that. It's the chapter house steps. This has been de-fished to some extent using FishEye Hemi, so getting those verticals straight, but with curvature. So this is the shot that I've got as that I've used quite often in images of the Sea of Steps image looking up here, based on a shot by F.H. Evans taken in 1903, classic architectural photography shot. But this one, slightly different place, still looking up here, but we can see into the chapter house here. So that's a view, but that's, once again, it's been stretched out, vertical straightened, horizontal lines go where they will. View of, this is Lincoln Cathedral, looking up under the tower. Another image, the amount of detail you get in these, they give a feel for the space inside places like this. I will always take a lens if I'm going to a new cathedral. I don't expect to take many shots using this, but if I see a view that I think works for it, then it's worth doing. Now, here's a view taken, 35mm sensor here, but with the camera in portrait mode, and this one has been stretched out. We now have, in the same image, we have looking dead ahead, down to the far end of the cathedral, where you can see the scissor arches here. And I've also got a point directly overhead. So I've got 90-degree, I've got the field of view looking at the entire ceiling. So I encompass that view and the view upwards as well. Now, there was a guy called Michael Westmoreland who did a lot of early work in panoramic and ultra-wide photography, whose work I much admired. Used scanning films, so where the cameras moved, all kinds of stuff like that. And this is a shot Michael Westmoreland at his 80th birthday exhibition a few years ago, where he's got lots of these very wide, long panoramic shots. Now, these were taken with film. I admire the technique for these, and he was, pioneer in this area. And I've shown him some with this years. This is a few years ago. So showed him some of my work, and we discussed about various bits and pieces. Unfortunately, even with the very large prints, his eyesight wasn't up to seeing it. So but he was interested in what I was doing from a digital point of view, given he was doing all just film. Now, there's a commercial shot. That's Curve in Leicester. Once again, it's de-fished using FishEye Hemi, and the vertical lines are vertical, but you got the strong curves given the name of the building. That's why I did that one, so that one works for that. Now, an industrial shot. just part of getting a series of shots for promotional work for the company here. Take a few shots like this. I don't take many shots like this. I need to see whether it's actually going to work. But I found that pictures like this, graphic designers love them, and they put them into websites, into brochures and bits and pieces, just because they're different. This is uncropped, so you might end up cropping part of this off, or you might keep it, but it's got the shape of everything. And there's the bits where the verticals are vertical again, and you've got the long sweeping curving horizontals, both of the real curve of the roof and the curves from the projection of the image of the lens there. Now, I'll just finish off with a couple here, and these are from Ely Cathedral, which is, yeah, if you get a chance to visit Ely Cathedral, it's one of the great cathedrals. This is inside the lantern at Ely Cathedral, and I'm at a fair old height here, as you can see from the people down below, and I'm looking out through one of these panels. Some of them open up like doors, and you can look out directly out into here, and it gives an idea of this was all Victorian work here. Impressive, just stained glass, everything else looks really nice. And I'll just leave it on that one there, and that's a view looking down from the lantern in Ely Cathedral. You've got the colour, you've even got a person that you can see on one of the doors, gives a bit of scale for it, and you can see the size of the people down below. So there you go. Using fisheye lenses. Why do I use them? Because they give images which are striking. As I remember, I'm a commercial photographer as well, so I've got to look for images that other people want to look at, that will catch people's attention. Now, I happen to like going around cathedrals and looking stuff like this. I just like the look of it anyway. This was taken with a Canon 1DS Mark III, so 21 megapixels. Even allowing for cropping and a few other bits and pieces, I'm going to get 80 odd megapixels in the equivalent image out of this. That's a big difference for making prints and being able to zoom into things. And also with the sensor out of this, the dynamic range of it is so much better than the old 1DS Mark III that I would get much more detail in all this stained glass. So generally a much better picture. So there you have it. If you've got any questions, please do ask. I've got lots of, as I said, reviews and articles connected with fisheye stuff, so if you've got any specific questions, let me know. Please do subscribe to the channel if you've made it this far through the video. I appreciate it's quite a longish video, and hopefully it's of use and give you a few ideas for some of the things that you can do with fisheye lenses. They are not the one-trick pony that people think they are. So thanks, and bye.